Today we're going to continue our exploration of rhythm by beginning to read standard notation rhythm symbols. The first one that you need to know is the quarter note. The reason we're starting with this symbol is because for us today it's going to represent one beat. Remember from our previous video, one beat is a downbeat and an upbeat. The reason that we know that a quarter note is one beat is because of these two numbers on the left-hand side of your screen. It looks like a fraction, but in music we call this a time signature. A time signature tells us two things. The top number tells us how many beats are in one measure. The bottom number tells us the beat unit, or what kind of symbol gets one beat. When I say measure, I mean that we have 4 quarter notes, and then you'll see a vertical line in the music that looks like that. That vertical line tells us that we've filled up the space with as many beats as possible, and it's time to move on. So you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 quarter notes, a bar line, which tells us that the measure has ended, and then 4 more quarter notes, followed by another bar line. When it's the end of the piece, the final bar line will look like this. There will be a thin line and then a thick line immediately afterward. That's a signal to you that the piece is over and there's no more music to read. If we go back to the arrows from our first video, you'll see that these quarter notes line up with the downbeats. And using the solfege, again from our first video, we would call all of these quarter notes do. So now you can see something that looks a little bit more familiar as music notation, where each of these quarter notes is just called do. So this would sound like do, 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 do. For every symbol for sound in rhythm, there's an equal symbol for silence. This symbol is called a quarter rest. Just like the quarter note, it receives in 4/4 one beat of silence. So this symbol in 4/4 accounts for a downbeat and an upbeat. Just like with our quarter notes, we get 4 quarter rests followed by a bar line. That is one measure of quarter rests. Then we continue with 4 more beats of silence. If we were to line these symbols up with the arrows, you'll see that all of these quarter rests begin on downbeats, and they would all be called do. Here, you'll see I've put parentheses around the solfege to indicate that it's a rest. So even though we're thinking it and feeling it, we would not say do as a downbeat because it's rest, which means silence. As we progress, we can start to combine sound and silence, or notes and rests. So here I have a quarter note, a quarter rest, and followed by the same pattern. So we would call that do, do but a rest, and repeat. So this measure of 4/4 would sound like this. Do, do. You can also reverse those symbols so that I start the measure with a rest. This pattern would sound like this. Do, do. Now you can also have symbols that are longer than one beat. Here you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, if you combine 2 quarter notes, you make a half note. A half note is worth 2 beats. On the right side of your screen, you'll see if you combine 2 quarter rests, you create a half rest. If you've never read music before, it's easy to remember what a half rest looks like because it looks like a hat. So just remember hat, half rest. So both of these symbols are worth 2 beats, but one is sound and one is silence. In a measure of 4/4, you can fit 2 half notes because you can only have 4 beats in one measure. So here you would call this first one do and this second one do. But to keep track of the fact that we're holding through the second beat of the measure, we draw this line to remind ourselves to hold the note. This measure would sound like this. Do, do. We can also combine half notes and half rests. So here I have a half note that lasts for 2 beats, and then a half rest that also lasts for 2 beats. This measure would sound like this. Do. Finally, we've combined quarter notes into half notes. We can also combine half notes together into what we call a whole note. A whole note in 4/4 time lasts for 4 beats. You can also combine quarter rests into half rests and half rests into whole rests. So the top symbol here is called a whole rest and is worth 4 beats of silence. You can see that the difference between a half rest and a whole rest is that a half rest looks like a hat, and a whole rest, while it's spelled W-H-O-L-E, it looks like if you had a stick figure walking across the top, they would fall into a hole. So whole rest and half rest. They look similar, but are very different. Here, I have one whole note in a measure of 4/4 because a whole note is 4 beats long, and I can only fit one in the measure. So here, for all 4 downbeats, I would hold do, sustained for the whole measure. So that would sound like this. Do. I can do the same thing with a whole rest. A whole rest would be marked with do in parentheses and be sustained for the whole measure. So this measure would be 4 beats of silence, and it would sound like this. Now, when you're reading your choir music, even though you feel like you don't have to do anything because it's 4 beats of silence, it's very important that you keep track of the beats in which you don't sing. Because if you don't keep track of these 4 beats of silence, if you were to have a note on the next beat of the next measure, you'd be lost and you wouldn't know where to come in. So again, rests are just as important to keep track of as notes. As we wrap up this video, it's important to remember the symbols that you learned today. Quarter notes, which are worth 1 beat in 4/4, half notes, which are worth 2 beats, and whole notes, which are worth 4 beats. The equivalent symbols for silence in 4/4 are quarter rests, which are worth 1 beat, half rests, which are worth 2 beats, and whole rests, which are worth 4 beats. Memorizing the names of these symbols is going to be crucial for your progress in reading rhythm. So make sure you do so as soon as possible. Happy practicing!